Well, welcome everybody. This whole project started last July when I was hiking in the Trinity Alps with some friends. Oops, am I standing too close to the camera? Probably.
No, you're good. I'll keep scooting it around should we need.
And if you can't hear me at the back, let me know, or put up a hand. We were hiking, we came to this beautiful little creek, and I was going to go across it, and I thought, no, this is where I need to stop and do a little watercolor, because this is so pretty. So I sent my friends on ahead, and I sat down in Boulder and got out my sketching kit, and I did a watercolor, and it was terrible. And then I did another one, trying a different approach. That was terrible, too. I did two more. None of them worked. So I was in kind of a bad mood as I hiked back to the car. And thought about it that night and thought, wait a minute, the way I could force myself to get better at watercolor is by telling Jack, to get better at doing water, is by telling Jack that I'm going to teach a Nature Journal Club class on this. So I emailed him when I got back and said I'll do it in February, which was what? July, August, September, October, November, December, January, February. So that's like 8 months. You would think I could learn this in 8 months, wouldn't you, with a deadline? Unfortunately, though, there are still a lot of holes in what I know. Water is hard. It's always moving. How can you draw something that's always moving? Even when it's still, a gust of wind comes along and messes everything up. And the light changes. And the thing about reflections is that they change every time you move. The reflection that you see is always relative to your eyes. So if you stand up, you see a different reflection than you see if you're sitting down. If you walk over there, you see a different reflection than you see sitting here. So it's completely not something you can nail down. So I thought, okay, I'm going to bite the bullet and learn the science behind this. So I looked up a bunch of books. And I started making little diagrams with arrows and things bouncing off of other things. And, I used to do information graphics for a living. So I consider myself as being good at this. So I thought, I'm going to make the information graphic to end all information graphics that will totally explain this. But the problem was I couldn't understand it well enough to make an explanation. So I got to this point, and I read this, and I gave up. I mean, look at this. The resulting vertical scaling is impossible to predict without computer ray tracing techniques, but may shrink parts of the reflection showing the lowest part of the original object and magnify, I can't do this. My brain does not work this way. Is there an easier way? Get your boots out in the field. So I had a 2-week artist residency at Whiskey Town, and I thought, okay, I'm going to get out there, I'm going to sketch water every day, I'm going to photograph water, I'm going to figure out this talk. So here I am with my actual boots on the ground and my sketching thing. Now, Jack has this thing, I notice, I wonder, it reminds me of, as a way of figuring out what you're seeing. And I realized that that was a route that my brain could take for figuring this out. Jack does these beautiful journal pages with nice writing, and nice headings on it and everything. I can't do that, I just scribble. So I'm putting little captions so you can see what my scribble is. So this bit up here says, so what's happening with this blue streak? I kept on filling up the page. Here's some more little notes. This person has a long reflection. You can see the photo of where I was. This person does have a long reflection. And I tried to sketch all the things that I saw so that I would remember them as I was thinking about them. I added some more to this blue streak thing. Is the water wind ruffled, so there's lots of little bits of blue? I wondered about this slanted trunk. You can see it's slanted here, but then the reflection goes straight down. Why is that? That's not supposed to happen. Reflections are always supposed to have vertical correspondence. So if you've got a tree trunk that's doing that, here's the water's edge. Your reflection should do this. So I didn't understand it, so I made a note. Why do reflections get distorted into vertical columns? What's going on? So I thought I would try to set up this talk so that all of you could do the same thing. So go out and sit in the field, do sketches, and try and figure out what the hell is going on here. So before we started, I wondered if you've already got some burning questions about water, things that you have not been able to figure out. Anybody?
Do you know about tides and currents?
Oh.
The color. Jack said that some reflections are lighter and some reflections are darker, depending on what it is reflecting.
What's going on there?
What happened to that?
Other questions, other things you've been struggling to figure out.
When you look up from beneath the water, how do you figure out where the light is and how it moves? And what is it reflections that you're looking that are coming down from the water above, or things that you're seeing from beneath that are reflected on the surface?
So are you one of those magical people who sketches while scuba diving?
Or like people sitting inside of the Academy of Sciences.
Ah, okay, right. I know somebody who does that, actually.
Oh, sketches while scuba diving?
Yes.
Wow.
She has some sort of setup where
Okay.
she does it underwater.
What are the colors of water that most often use?
Yeah.
Something I've been wondering is, was there a question behind?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Something I've been wondering is how, like, sometimes water is moving in two different directions because of currents, and how to kind of like note that which direction things are moving through the drawing without adding too many lines and then essentially clouding up the water with a bunch of lines, but rather just to kind of give the impression of movement.
Yeah. Sissy.
So I noticed when I was doing the reflection and a tree trunk was pretty straight and a branch was going off at kind of a 45-degree, like 90-degree angle like this. The reflection brought the branch more vertical.
Wow.
How do you draw something that's under the water without it looking like it's over the water?
Really hard one.
The role of white when you're drawing water. Sometimes it's like when it's farther away, it should look different than when it's closer, and then when you're dealing with waves, it's really hard to figure out how to
Yes.
paint and it's so
Just the movement, because there's like, there's a still day where it's glassy smooth. Kind of get that, but if you're like by a brook or a stream or something and it's moving,
Yes.
that's
Yeah.
how.
Breaking waves.
Yes. Actually, I'm not going to do waves this time. No waves, no waterfall, no foam. I had about 3 times as much material as I could fit into this, and I started dumping stuff. So maybe next year we'll do waves and foam.
Up on the Lyle Fork in Tuolumne, there's these beautiful flat rocks with the water glass over them. And I don't know how to make it look like there's water and rock.
Good one. So it's interesting that this is mostly a different set of questions from the one the last class had. So there is a lot of stuff to not understand here. So I'm hoping that we can at least make a start in laying out where the questions are and some strategies for trying to solve these problems yourself. So we're going to start with lakes, bays, mostly still bodies of water. We'll do the streams and the really hard stuff later. So everyone's had this experience, I'm sure, of having a moment when the lake seemed like a perfect mirror reflection, that you thought if you held a mirror up to that, it would be exactly the same thing. And I wish we had a slightly better contrast thing here, but I will be uploading the PowerPoint to Jack's website. So if you want to look and see what the slides really look like, you can download it and have a look through it. So anyway, looking at this, it looks like a mirror. you would think if the lake was a mirror and you were holding it out there, that you would get exactly that reflection. So I did a little experiment with it, that I took the reflection and flipped it up so it's right next to the original image. So you can see it's actually very different. So what are the differences between these two? Uh-huh.
It's not crisp.
Uh-huh. Yeah. And it's fine to call out your thinking out loud in this class. The point is to get you thinking, so it's okay to think aloud, and that will probably make it easier for you to remember stuff. You can say, oh, the water looks darker, and that kind of stuff. So here's the things that I noticed first. So overall, the reflection is darker. The mountains are lower. There's some horizontal displacement. The trees are sort of getting wobbled up here, and there's a general loss of detail in the reflection. So let's take these one at a time. Why is it darker? So I still couldn't resist trying to do some information graphics, but I thought if I did scribbly ones in pencil, they wouldn't be so intimidating. So I'm a stick figure in all of these. So one theory I've got as to why it's darker, and I don't truly know the answer to this, but the hypothesis is that refraction is happening, where some of the light goes into the water, not all of it's reflected. So if some of the light's going into the water, there's not as much reflected back, so it's not going to look as bright. Does that make sense? Maybe, I think. It's my best guess. Joy.
I think the background is darker. Underneath the lake is dirt that is brown or, black, and then you have the light sky behind it. You have a generally brighter up above and underneath it's darker.
It's a good hypothesis, but I do, in fact, know this lake, and I know it's very deep. So, and very clear, too. So, I don't know. Anyway, keep thinking about it. So, I'm happy to have as many hypotheses as you can come up with. So, are reflections always darker? Can we say this is a general rule about reflections? Houseboats in Mission Creek looks to me like they're mostly darker in the reflection. Again, hard to tell. These actually look quite a bit darker. Look at the sky. It's quite a bit lighter, much darker down there. And the foliage is a lot darker. Ooh, again, hard to see here. You'll just have to take my word for it. It's quite a lot darker. Look at the clouds. They're much brighter here, much darker in the reflection.
It seems to get darker as you get farther away from the original. Right at the shore, it's light, but as you come.
Well, good. That's a good theory. Let's watch for that and see if we can back that one up. Here again, you can see a big difference in the photo, although some of that's the gamut of the photo. But you can see the sky is a lot darker there than here. The vegetation is darker. So if that's a general rule and you're doing watercolors, there's a very easy out here, that you just paint the top and the bottom the same, and then when the bottom is dry, you put a glaze over it to darken it all a bit. That's an easy one to do. However, it doesn't quite seem to always apply. This one, there seemed to be a value shift rather than a darkness. But it was a chilly winter's day and there wasn't a lot of light. I can't generalize for what's happening here. But one thing I can generalize about is that the sun, both in the sky and reflected, is always going to be pure white. And this is because the sun is putting out so much more light than everything else that it just kind of swamps your vision. Okay, the next one. Why are the mountains lower? How can this be? So I'm attempting to figure this out with another one of those little diagrams. So the blue line is from the top of the mountain, the red line is from the top of the trees. So this is what we're seeing in the actual object. Is the mountain is higher than the trees, but in the reflection, because water reflects off the lake as the same angle it hits the lake, something different will happen in the reflection and they get scrambled. Probably everybody remembers from science class, the angle of incidence equals the angle of reflection. That always left me completely confused. So anyway, this is the same thing in plain language. So again, you'll see the blue line is the top of the mountain and the red line is the top of the tree.
I have a question.
Yeah?
Do those mountains change height if you painter or the photographer lowered so if you were lowered to the feet, would the mountains go up?
I think they would with things that were closer to you, but because the mountain's actually quite distant. I think it wouldn't in this case, but it would if you were looking at stuff closer to the shoreline.
Yeah.
But again, it's that same principle. The reflection is always relative to you.
Right.
Let's see. So this introduces an important principle here. The distance from the water's edge. So the top of that mountain is a lot further from the water's edge than the trees. And if you look at this one, see this distant line of hills here, does not show up in the reflection. So you can see it up here in the original, but it's not down there where it ought to be. It's that same principle of the stuff that's further away gets refracted in a different way. This one. Okay, so we can see the two girls because they're right at the water's edge, and this one. We can see the rocks reflected. We can see this stuff reflected, but we don't see any of this grass here, because that's a bank that's mostly level that's going back, and it's just not high enough to make it into the reflection. Okay, here we are at Chrissy Field, about 100 yards from where we are right now. There's the lagoon. And so you can see that this log by the edge makes it into the reflection. All of this stuff here doesn't make it. This log does not make it because it's further back. Some of this bank makes it. Actually, I think maybe the top of this bank makes it. But I don't think any of this further stuff back here makes it. Alcatraz doesn't turn up. I think this bush is what we're seeing, but not Alcatraz, it's hidden. And all of the East Bay Hills don't make it.
And the fence post doesn't make it.
Good point. Excellent. The fence posts don't make it. They're set far enough back that we're not picking them up in the reflection. So there's no way you can figure this out. You can't analyze it without that computer ray tracing machine. You just have to sit there and pay attention and think about what you're seeing. Okay, here's another one just around the corner from here. So we get the bank, we get some of this foliage here, but we don't get the Palace of Fine Arts. It's far enough back that it's not making it into the reflection.
Which floor would you say?
If it were taller, would you say?
Yeah, possibly, but I'm not sure how much taller it would have to be to see it.
Yeah.
But because it actually is quite a ways back. And again, right around the corner from here. So we've got the rocks, they're all making it into the reflection. We've got the stuff in the bank, I think that's making it. See, this corresponds there, that corresponds there. We've got the white dog.
How interesting.
But all of this stuff is this flat sand that goes back, didn't make it into the reflection at all. None of the fence posts did. Or wait a minute, that might be a fence post. Is that a fence post? No, I think it's a rock. So, interesting stuff. Some sites refer to this as truncation, others call it setback. You can call it whatever you want, just pay attention to it. So, another point, why is the reflection different? This horizontal displacement, it's easier to understand if I flip it back the way it's supposed to be. So what's happening here? Why is that tree breaking up? Hypotheses.
The water's
Surface of the water is where the water is.
Right. That's my theory too. It's the ripples are breaking up the image. So, here we are back looking at the Sierra Buttes. There's some ripples in the foreground. What's happening here? So clearly this white stuff is the reflected sun on the snowpack. And this dark stuff is probably the rocks and the forest. And the other side of the ripples have blue. So I'm guessing that blue comes from the sky and it's reflecting off the front of the ripple up to my nose. Whereas the stuff on the back of the ripple, the dark stuff, is reflecting off the back of the ripple. So these bits which have dark here and little bits of snowpack are actually on the back side of the ripple. And the front side of the ripple is reflecting the sky behind me, or above me maybe. Probably both. The ripples have interesting shapes that do all kinds of things to the reflections. So here's another puzzle. Whoops. My computer loves to tell me that it has no internet periodically. I don't know why it keeps obsessing over the lack of internet, but
Sorry, so if you were standing someplace 90 degrees perpendicular to that view, with the ripples going the other direction?
I think what was happening was that the wind was coming in my face, so it was blowing the ripples towards me.
So if you were standing 90 degrees that way, they'd be going.
Yeah, and who knows what would happen then.
All right.
The geometry of that is just beyond me. But so you can see that same effect there, that the dark of the trees is reflected in the back of the ripple. The sky is reflected in the front of the ripple. But what happens as you go back? The ripple sort of consolidates. And I think what's happening there, and again, this is just my guess, is that as you go further back, I'm not able to see the backs of the ripples. I'm only able to see the front because they're further away. I probably should do a little diagram for that too. So that we're losing the blue, which is oh no, wait a minute, that doesn't make sense, does it? No, okay, well, scrap that theory. I've been doing this for 9 months, going, okay, now, does this work? No. How about that? Anyway, what you see is true, however it's explained. So you can see at any rate that the ripples get compressed, and what you're just seeing is sort of solid dark as you get further away instead of this broken up image. So this is a lot of thinking so far. So let's try just doing a drawing and get out a pencil and some paper and just try to sketch this. It doesn't have to be accurate. This is just an exercise to try and give your brain a chance to process what you're seeing here, as opposed to me just talking a lot. And while you're sketching it, you'll be thinking about what you're seeing. So here's a pencil sketch I did earlier in the previous class. Doesn't even really look like ripples. It's a mental exercise to get your mental arms around what exactly is happening here. Oh, and I forgot to say, if you don't have materials, I've got pencils and paper up here. We have some brave people doing it in watercolor. That takes guts.
You push the button.
Oh, did I? Oops, sorry.
Just got smaller.
What did it?
Now it's fine.
Okay. By the way, this is from the January Nature Journal Club field trip to Miller Knox Shoreline Park. Were any of you on that? A few of you, yeah. So while you were dutifully sketching waterfowl, I was sitting at the edge of the water trying to do reflections, doing a series of watercolor studies that mostly didn't work, but at least I got a lot of photos. The Miller Knox Shoreline Park. It's in Richmond, near Point Richmond. Very cool spot. I've never been there before. Jack takes us to the most amazing places. So while you're doing this, you've probably come across some questions. Anything that's occurred that you don't understand about this?
I keep expecting it to have like perspective, like normal perspective
Uh-huh.
in the world, and it doesn't look like it does, because there's a straight line coming. It doesn't get smaller as it gets farther away, but the ripples get farther away.
I never thought of that. That's a really good point.
It's interesting to see where the ripples are not, where there's spaces where the water still looks blue,
Uh-huh.
and there's no action.
Yeah, what is going on there?
Well, seeing how like the further that we seem to get away from the actual trees, the more that it becomes one big mass.
Yes.
Whereas there's much more detail. Like I can almost like the reflection is it's almost like a mirror coming from the shoreline. But once I get down here, like where the language is, it just becomes this one big dark kind of blob. And like how do you make it look
How do you
like
make
that?
a dark blob? Yeah.
And then also the other problem I was having is that I was doing kind of like a quick sketch of the tree trunks, but then when I did the reflection, I noticed I was using the same technique. So really, like the top and the bottom are looking the same. So I had to change my technique for the stuff on land so that the water stuff looked
Right.
kind of wavy. And
Yeah.
So I was having to come up with 2 different ways to draw the same object, even though, well, technically they're not, but yeah, you know what I mean?
Right, well, they are. I mean, this is in 3D space,
Yeah.
and this is on a flat plane, or not quite, kind of flat.
In a way, it's easier to draw the reflections, because the reflections aren't really as detailed, so
Uh-huh.
it's not as much detail to mess up.
Uh-huh.
You can sort of get the general shape of it, and then that helps. And then it's also kind of fun trying to do the duckies that are gliding over the
Yeah.
reflections,
Uh-huh.
and it's a bit different movement. in
Yeah.
water. And seeing them like collide with each other makes it even more pure water like.
Thank heaven for small mercies. Some things get easier. Jack, you had a thought.
Yeah, I just thought it was interesting that how much darker the real objects are than the reflection images.
Right. And the reflection part was supposed to get darker, so what happened there?
Just rascally reflection.
Yeah.
It's less about the reflections, but I always have trouble with the line where the water meets the land. Because it's not dark, but it's, I don't know, maybe
Right.
it's just hard to portray that.
And look what's happening here. It's like there's a dark line, and then there's a light area, and then there's another dark area. What is that?
The
Oh,
mountains
sorry, I had another
don't show
question.
up in the lake at all.
The what?
The mountain, you've got that
Right.
nice
Yes,
horizon
good point.
mountain.
Yeah, the mountains are completely vanished, and you'd think you would be able to see them because they're so dark. So it looks like we don't get the grass, we don't get these bushes, we don't get the mountains. That's all too far back to see. So these were my observations, but you all came up with a lot more. Yeah, why aren't the grass and mountains reflected? What about those waterbird wakes? Why are they dark? That's a good reason. Good hypothesis.
Shadows on the surface.
Drag.
It's actually a shadow of the duck on the surface, not.
There might be some shadow.
I think because the ripples, they make the ripples go in different directions, right? So
Yeah.
when you come out from behind them, whereas we're seeing from kind of horizontally from our perspective.
I'd buy that.
It lowered the water in their wake.
That's right.
So, yeah.
They're speedboats and the water is going down. And, like, what's this column of light? Why is it doing that? And, wait, there's another one. It's almost like all the dark bits especially become columns, and you can see this whole thing as a series of vertical columns. Something about the way light gets transmitted over this particular kind of water is making those columns. So I took a whole series of photos in the same spot. Every time the surface changed, I took another photo, just so we could get some idea of what's happening here. So, what's that dark streak? Do we have any sailors in the room?
It's just an area that's disturbed on the water top.
Uh-huh.
Where it's more reflective, the water top is smoother.
Uh-huh.
And so where it's a little ripply, that's where you just see the dark.
That makes sense. I'd buy that. So we're going to tentatively say that these are little mini gusts of wind, but I'm not a sailor, so I'm not sure about that. So here we go. This wind has moved in closer to shore, and now it's pretty much swallowed up all the reflections.
Does it look like the reflection on the right is now darker than the object?
Yes,
Yeah.
it does.
So it's interesting in that other photograph, there's
Yeah.
something that's going on.
Although again, we'd need a darker room to see this better.
Yeah.
I'll go home tonight and run everything through Photoshop and up the contrast. But anyway, it's interesting. No reflections. So if you're out there sketching and you don't feel like putting those reflections in just because you don't like them, you have a valid reason for not doing it. You could say the water was ruffled and the reflection was gone. In fact, I had a whole section of this which I had to drop about why there is sometimes no reflection, but you can make it up. So another hypothesis I had, are the reflections usually about as long as the object that's reflected?
It gives us better perspective with that, stand in the foreground, distance you are.
Right. Oh, yes, good point.
So if we didn't have that,
Uh-huh.
perception we have.
I should recrop them all so I can see them in all of them. So you notice what I've done in this one is I've put the midpoint at the bottom of the tree up in the bank. So when something is set back, you can try and imagine the reflection is actually starting at where the bottom of the tree is instead of at the water line. But you can see that roughly here, the reflection is about the same distance as the object being reflected. Except now, look what's happened. They're longer now. Like, they're way longer.
From these photos, is the, what's the difference in time, or do you think that these phenomena are being affected by, like, are they wind?
I was sitting there sketching for about half an hour, and pretty much every time I looked up, it was different. And I think, oh, I'm going to put a wind streak there, and I'd get out my brush and get the color, and I'd look up and it was gone. So something else odd here is, remember how we have the tree trunk with an angled reflection? It goes at an angle here and then it kind of straightens out. So something about the way the water is reflecting here is straightening out those angles. Oh wait, here, it's even straightening out more in this one. So you can see it does a little jog there and then it goes straight down. So there's another interesting phenomenon happening here. Anyway, you can see how these trees turn into this vague mass that you can get some idea of the outer edges, but the middle of it is all just blurry. So again, looking here, this time I got closer to the Palace of Fine Arts, so I did actually get it in the reflection. And you can see that these outside high value difference edges hold up in the reflection, but the mass of the middle still stays kind of a blob. You can see the same thing here too. The high value difference edges show up, especially the vertical ones. And you can see what's happening to these windows is that they all get moved into long vertical strokes. And here, where there's heavy backlighting, the detail in the reflection pretty much disappears. Like you can see the edge of the boat's reflection, but you can't see the stripe of the reflection. It just goes dark. I was reading about this in one of those books, and it said you'll be able to see the outline of the boat, but not the name of the boat painted on the side. So especially at low light and in sunset, reflections can go completely black. Even if you're still seeing some light in the foliage, they'll go quite black. Although you can see this light streak here showing us where the shoreline is. I'm not sure why there's a light streak there, but it's something to watch for, light or dark streaks where the water meets the land. Are a good visual cue that you can put in your sketches to show where the reflection ends and the original starts. So often, so here's the trees, and here's the shoreline, and often there's a black streak there. Sometimes if it's a creek or somewhere where the water level is rising and falling a lot, you get a black streak because there's an edge of dark, wet rock that's turning up blacker. And sometimes you get an edge of reflection right along here, which gives you a little white bit. So if you're trying to differentiate between the thing you're seeing and its reflection, watch for a light streak or a dark streak along the edge and put it in if you see it. Here you can kind of see there's a dark streak along the edge. Okay, and again, here the sky and the reflected sky has all the color, but the reflections are just a solid mass of black. Now there's something very interesting happening here. Do you see the reflection of the deck of the Golden Gate Bridge? I can see the cables, I can see the shape of this, I can see the pylon, but where's the deck?
Too low.
It's not too low, because look at these pylons here, you can see them there, so the deck should be at the top of those pylons, so it should be right there.
Isn't that related to the one you were saying earlier, the high value vertical edges of the?
Vertical edges will show up much better than horizontal edges. So I was so puzzled by this that I went back the next day in daylight. In fact, my husband and I were walking along the water here trying to figure out what was going on, and he was coming up with all these ridiculous theories, which of course, being my husband, I just said, I didn't say, that doesn't make any sense. So I came back the next day in daylight, and you still can't see the deck. There's a little bit of a blur here, which might be it. And the other really puzzling thing here is that you see these cross pieces here, these horizontals?
Oh.
They're not there. What's happening? What is it about the reflection that is destroying horizontal edges but keeping the vertical ones? You can see there's almost a little hint of it here, maybe a little bit there, but basically the cross pieces are gone. Now, in case you think this is something to do with this being the Bay Bridge or the angle of light or something, I will show you the Bay Bridge as opposed to the Golden Gate Bridge. It doesn't have a deck reflected either. So in this case, I'm looking south instead of northeast. Different kind of light altogether, but the horizontal stuff is still gone. And, you know, that's pretty substantial. Why is that not reflecting?
Is it because of the angle of the sun that
I don't know.
You could get a drone that like went up in space and just kept going up until you see it. It's just you're not high enough.
Yeah.
Well, if you want to do your own research right after this class, take a walk along the lagoon and see if you're getting reflections of the deck or the cross pieces. Okay, so one more thing about mirrors that I couldn't fit into the other one is that if you think of this mirror as the surface of the lake, this is hard to do at this angle, but imagine that my hand is an overhanging tree. And you should be able to see the palm of my hand. Oh, sorry, Jack. You should be able to see stuff underneath my hand that you can't actually see in the original, that you can only see in the reflection. Yeah, so if you look at this bridge, you can see the underside of the bridge, which is not visible in the actual original. It's only visible in the reflection, because the water is getting underneath that bridge and showing us the bottom of it.
That's a horizontal surface you can see.
It is, but there's no ripples, and my theory is that the ripples are somehow destroying the horizontal stuff, whereas here we've got one of those mirror surfaces, and also I'm right up close to it. This is just by Fort Mason, walking along. I was about 20 feet away from it. So here's another case of the reflection showing you something that the original is not. So if you look at this tree, it's a fairly distinctive shape, and you see it reflected down there. Now, you see there's a lot of blue around the tree here in the reflection. but there's no blue around it there. So the mirror is getting underneath it and reflecting the sky. So, you know, the sky's up here, and somehow the angle of light that's hitting that water is picking up the sky and the branch. So it's a mirror, but it's not a mirror that works in the way you expect it to. Okay, well, that was the easy stuff. So now we're getting to the really hard stuff. So creeks, streams, narrow bodies of water that move rapidly behave slightly differently. I mean, it's still the same principles, but there's a lot more factors of complexity. So you get things like this little pool at the base of the waterfall, where there's rock walls all around. We're getting a reflection of, I think this is sky here. I think this white stuff here is the waterfall reflecting. I don't know what this blue stuff is. This golden stuff, some of it I think is the yellow trees at the top of the waterfall. Some of it I think is we're seeing the bottom because it's very shallow, and water often goes fairly golden in streams in the mountains. Here's a close-up of that. And look at the complexity of the colors we're getting in those ripples. And it's partly because the sources have so much more information. So before we were just looking at blue sky, dark hill, dark forest. So we just had two colors in the ripples. Here the ripples are more complex, so they're breaking the light up in more different ways. And we've got a lot more stuff to reflect. So again, here's the big one, and here's a close-up. We're getting a few bits of foam floating down the river too. So I'm afraid this one is not going to show up at all, but if you get the PowerPoint, what you'll see is that the shadows of these trees here are showing across the riverbed. The reason for that is that the water is so shallow that you can see the difference on the bottom from when it's in shade and when it's in sun. Whereas if you're having a shadow on a deep, clear lake, the shadow will not show up in the lake at all, because the light just kind of sinks deep into the lake, I think. That's my theory anyway. The only situation in which you will get the shadow showing up is if there's a lot of sediment in the water. If you've got really cloudy water, then those particles will reflect back the light, and you'll see the difference between the shadowed water and the sunlit water. So, But when you're looking at mountain creeks and streams, they're usually shallow enough that the shadows are an extra factor to think about here. So in this area, there's sun in the bottom, you can see the rocks, and then there's shadow. And some of that is reflections. So this is not shadow, that's reflection, but I think the water's in shadow because there's a streak of sun hitting it there. And you can see that sun bouncing off the bottom. Unfortunately, we're also unable to see the rocks here, but if you look at the actual slide, you'll see a whole lot of mossy rocks under the water here. But in the distance, you can't see through to the bottom. And I think, again, that's something about the angle of vision, that close up you can see the rocks, farther away you can't. The depth is pretty much the same throughout this pool. So it's not to do with depth. It's something to do with the angle of the light.
The angle of the viewer, the way that the light is hitting the viewer, right? So you're saying that the closer you are, you can kind of like cut the angle of the water and you can look down into it. But if you're like further away, you're getting
just getting reflections,
You're getting just reflections.
Yeah.
Okay. Wow.
And then, sometimes looking at a stream, you get really complex ripples and leaves and. But even at this, you can see some of the principles that we saw, even though the ripples are curved rather than straight. You can see that one side of the ripple is reflecting the sky, that's the light color, and the other side is reflecting something darker, whether it's forest or rock or me, I don't know. And you can see that there's still a little bit of transparency. See this underwater green leaf that you can see through the reflections? So that adds a whole other layer of complexity if you're not only dealing with reflections, but you're dealing with light coming up from the bottom. So how have other artists solved these problems? I thought I'd do a little survey, and you can decide what you want to steal, what might work for you. Anybody know Bill Cohn? Yeah. He teaches at the Sierra Nevada Field Campus a pastel class, which I did one year. And he's worked for Pixar and is sort of their color and light specialist, so he'll be in charge of the color in a whole movie and making sure the color is consistent. So this guy really understands light at a level way, way beyond I do. And I sat through his lecture explaining this, and I thought, okay, I get it. And I walked out to the creek, and it was all gone from my head immediately. Like, he had some explanation of why you could see the bottom sometimes and not others. It made total sense from the slide, and I could not apply it in the field. But anyway, he clearly understands it. So here's an example of rocks that are above water and a reflection and rocks that are underwater. So how can you tell which rocks are above water and which are below? What are the cues that he's giving you? Just say your answers aloud. I don't care if there's a general murmur. This is just to get you thinking.
Flatter underneath.
There's a dark line.
Right, there's a dark line. You can see that this is a reflection. You can see the vertical correspondence of the angles. And I'm pretty sure that these are rocks underneath because they're blurry and they've got soft edges, whereas these things up here have hard edges. And he's giving you a really good cue here in that white foam on the top. That could only be on the surface of the water. So that's another way you know that this is the surface of the water and you're seeing these rocks underneath. Here's another Bill Cohn. So I'm guessing this blue is reflection.
Is that a photograph or a painting?
That's a pastel painting. But this guy does stuff that takes it's like photographs and beyond. And he does it in the field too. Here's a reflection, here's a reflection. I'm guessing this is sunlight on water. Again, have a look at this on the PowerPoint or look him up online and look at some of his stuff. It's really revealing. And the amazing John Singer Sargent, more than 100 years ago, he was at the top of the game on this. So look at the cues he's giving you about what's water and what's rock. Just say them aloud if you can think of them.
The blue spot on the upper right would be water.
Right.
The
Probably
tops
sky
are,
reflection.
the tops are dry and hence white looking, and the bottoms are wet and darker.
Very good point. Dry rock looks different from wet rock, so it looks lighter. So I'm guessing this is some dry. These look like little sparkly reflections, but I'm not sure.
Like in a swimming pool.
Yeah,
Where the-
right.
The light sparkling ones are lying on the rocks instead of breaking up the rock, it breaks upon the rock.
Right,
Uh-huh.
yeah.
So we're swimming the rock, but the rock's still solid.
Beautiful ripples there.
Yeah. More of that like sky kind of being reflected too, those little patches of blue every now and then.
Yeah.
Like a big swath of light
Yeah.
kind of laying on top of everything.
So there's some special challenges mixing colors like this. So that yellow is so vibrant and bright, that blue is so intense. You can't get away with wishy-washy watercolors. You have to get them really wet, get them really strong, and not be timid about putting them on, or you're going to miss everything that's exciting about this. So I did a little sample sheet, which I'm going to pass around. I'll start passing it here. You can see how bright these colors really are when you look at the actual sheet. So there's a difference between transparent and opaque watercolors. And when you're working in water like this, there's a distinct advantage to using transparent colors. You can get a lot more done with them. So I've got keys here. So if it's a circle, that means it's transparent. If it's a solid circle, that means it's opaque. So this bloodstone is made of a ground up rock that's got a lot of iron in it. And all those particles of the mineral can be completely opaque. Whereas this nickel azo yellow and the quinacridone gold are made in a lab. Quinacridone gold is actually made as a car paint color. And they are totally transparent. So what I've done here to get some foliage greens is to mix all of them with phthalo blue, which is another super transparent color. It's one of those colors that can be very hard to use. For years I would put it in my palette and then pick it out again because it took over. And it took me about 15 years to finally learn how to use it. But it is an amazing color. It's a pretty pure cyan and very, very transparent. You just have to use it very sparingly. So I mixed a little bit with all of these yellows to get some nice greens that look like a lot of those greens. And then the other thing I did here is to put down a wash of the phthalo blue from darkest to lightest, let it dry completely, and then I put stripes of yellow over the top to see how opaque or transparent those yellows were and those browns. So you can see that the nickel azo yellow is pretty much completely transparent. This is the quinacridone gold. You can see the Hansa yellow light has got a bit more opacity. The burnt sienna has a bit more opacity. Yellow ochre is more opaque. Yellow ochre is just ground up ochre rock. So if you're doing those mountain streams and trying to get those brilliant colors, often you'll want to do glazes where you let the paint dry and then go over it with another transparent color. And you can get really rich, vibrant color that way, but you won't get it so much with the opaque colors. You need to use the transparent colors. If you want to know what the paints in your palette are, pretty much every reputable manufacturer has color charts and they'll tell you how transparent or opaque it is. Or you can do a test, like write the name of the color on a piece of paper and then do a swatch of paint over it and see how much it covers up your writing. Another trick, Jack, you probably don't even know this. I know something Jack doesn't know. If you want to get a really dark color, remember Jack's talk on value, he talked about going to 11 on a scale of 10 with the dark. If you want to get a really dark color, the trick is to mix several transparent colors together. Now that is totally counterintuitive, but if you look at that chart when it's going around, and you look where the quinacridone gold goes over the phthalo blue when it's darkest, you'll see how dark it gets, whereas the opaque colors, there's a limit to how dark they can get, but the transparent colors will go to almost total black. That's a whole nother class, but just a mention of that. How are we doing for time? Doing okay. So another color that's very handy to mix when you're doing reflections in mountain streams is, again, you can't see it here, but sometimes a reflection would just be a single deep green. So this whole area here is almost the same color, and it's a deep green. So I did some tests on mixing those kinds of deep greens. And I'll pass this one around too. Here's another case. Again, you can't see it very well, but all of these reflections are pretty much the same green, with just a few highlights there and the orange of the kayak, but all the rest of it is green. And this one here too, again, look at it in the original. But it's a really, really beautiful deep green for the whole reflection, the whole mass of that forest. Now, why it's all the same color, I do not know, because clearly what it's reflecting has lots of yellow in it. But for some reason of the angle of the light, a shadow or whatever, it's coming across as a single deep green reflection. So how can you mix those? If you take a blue like phthalo blue and you mix it with an orangey color, like quinacridone gold, like yellow ochre, there's a bunch of them out there, the yellows that have a lot of orange in them. you'll get these broken greens that are just like our Sierra greens. If you use a yellow that's more of a pure, slightly greeny yellow, like a Hensa yellow light or a nickel azo yellow, you'll get a pure color that looks like the green in an English forest. You know, like those David Hockney paintings he did of the forests around his mother's home in England have this really pure viridian green, which is completely not found in California. All of the greens you see in our mountains are broken greens like this. So if you're using a yellow that doesn't have any orange in it, you need to add some red in there somewhere. So you can add a magenta. Here I added a transparent brown oxide, and it just knocks the edge off it enough so that it looks like the greens that you're seeing. So again, I'll pass this around. Let's start on the other side. Yeah, so I took little chips of all of those greens, and they're all lovely greens. So you can actually work with a lot of these colors and get something that works. But what I urge you to do is use a limited palette here. So if you start out using a phthalo blue and a quinacridone gold, use those to mix all of your greens, and the whole scene will have a unity and a richness that it won't if you're just throwing in every color that you've got. So here, I use the Indian Throne blue, also another good transparent blue. Indian Throne goes really dark. If you mix it with a transparent orange, you'll get total black, like nothing else you can, but it has to be those transparent colors. Cobalt is not transparent. The greens you'll get with that are muddier. You can get great skies with cobalt. You can get all kinds of great things with cobalt. But it is basically a mineral color and won't do the things that the transparent colors will. Ultramarine is sort of halfway there. It's interesting. All of these pigments have very different properties when you use them. So the where did we go? Going back here. Damn, I've forgotten. The time it wanted me to go back a few slides. Well, I'll pick it up later. Oh, I know what I was going to say. So nickel azo yellow and phthalo blue are both really pushy colors. So if you put down a wash of some colors and you drop some nickel azo yellow into it, it'll shove all the other colors aside and make this splotch for itself of yellow right in the middle of everything else. Cobalt blue, on the other hand, is a very wimpy color and very sort of shy and retiring. You have to use a lot of it to get anything very intense. If you use phthalo blue, just the tiniest bit of it will knock everything else out. So you have to get to know your colors. You can do things with pretty much any color, so long as you buy decent artist grade colors, but you need to know their properties and how they'll behave. Oops. Okay, so layering watercolors. When you've got the transparent colors, Shari Blaukopf is amazing at reflection. She is totally the bomb. So she'll start with a pale sky color, cover most of the area with it, then drop in a slightly darker color, and then drop in a little bit of a darker color. You can see here she's done a wash in the background of a lot of different colors blending together, and then she's dropped in some hard-edged dark highlights. She's done the same sort of thing in the mountains here too. You can see those vertical columns and the ripples. She's left the ripples to get that sky color, but she had to put the sky color down first and then put the green for the back of the ripples over the top of it.
So is that light green underneath?
Yeah, that's the exception. It's the light green. And she might have lifted out these columns here too. She might have gone in with a clean, damp brush and just lifted up enough of the color to get this sort of blurry, lighter shape.
Not that white line.
Yeah. Okay, Winslow Homer, I mean, how can you top that? But again, what he's doing is he's putting down a light wash first, sky color, and then he's putting successively darker blobs of color on top of it. Unfortunately, this is lost. But this reflection here, he's layering liquid acrylics instead of watercolor and getting some really beautiful transparent effects. This woman, you can see she started with this green and then just layered all this other stuff on top of it and ended up by layering dabs of white on top. Isn't that cool? And it totally looks like water. There's some magic in that scene that I don't understand how she did it.
So crazy.
So, ripple patterns. I spent a lot of time sitting by the edges of creeks at twilight, trying to understand ripple patterns I'm seeing. Even though they're moving constantly, because it's a sort of standing water situation, the water will come up against a boulder here and always make these kinds of patterns. So if you stare at it long enough, this ripple would not have been next to the next ripple when I first saw the first ripple, but another one came along similar enough like it that I could keep filling it in. It's really nice to do this at twilight because the colors get simpler. Again, as we saw in the low light situations, the dark colors get darker. Practice doing different kinds of ripples. Here's one I did just in black and white because I was just trying to understand the patterns that I was seeing. This was almost dark, so I could only see gray and white. But again, a really useful kind of learning exercise to try and study what you're seeing. And then the next time you try and do something more complex, that structure will be in your brain that you can build on. So let's see what some other artists have done about those kinds of ripple patterns in water. Carolyn Lord, she's a Bay Area artist. She lives in the East Bay, is this immaculately careful watercolorist. And how long did she have to study those patterns before she could do that beautiful painting? To really understand the types of patterns she was seeing in each of those types of water. Now, I could never do this kind of painting. I have to dash it off in a hurry, but she is slow and immaculate. David Hockney, we certainly know he's done a lot of water patterns. Practice on a swimming pool. This guy's up in Seattle. I love the looseness and freedom of the marks he makes, for the way the watercolor flows. Here's an Australian, wild marks, but you certainly know that they're moving water. This guy's Portuguese. If you're going to Porto this summer for the International Urban Sketchers Symposium, you might meet him. Again, very simple little ripple marks, but doesn't that read well? And you know, here, little flowing water marks. So, looking at the kinds of brushstrokes and marks made by different mediums that suggest waves and ripples. So, Andrew Wyeth, I think, did that in his early 20s and then abandoned this. I don't know how he could do that, but this seems to me like unbelievably wonderful. This is a sketcher in France. You might meet her at an Urban Sketchers Symposium, but those marks are just completely splashy water. Nina Kushina lives in San Jose. She does classes up here sometimes. You might meet her. She does a lot of gouache. And again, with these few simple marks, she's completely caught the essence of those ripples. Monet, oil painting. You can do this with oils. You can do this with anything. You would never for a minute be in doubt that that was water.
Yeah.
I mean, he gives you the cues, like there's the long vertical columns. But the way he handles the ripples, just with lots of little dabs of paint, they're completely ripples. Here we are in pen and ink. You know, simple little marks, they read as ripples. Water-soluble marker pen, I think. He just drew this and ran some water over it. What looks like water. I think this is ballpoint pen. You could do that in your next boring meeting, so where they can't see you on the go-to-meetup camera and do some ribbons. Computer, perfectly good tool too. This guy lives in the East Bay too. We have immense richness of talent in this area, people you can learn from. So let's see if we've got time to do this. Okay, let's just take 5 minutes really fast. Get whatever medium you've got that's close at hand and try making some rippled shapes. So there's some inspiration.
Do you ever lay down like a wash of just water to, kind of create a water effect essentially? Or do you?
I do if I want soft edges, and I do if I want unpredictable stuff like in foliage. But I think it's hard in water because I want to be a little bit more precise.
Okay.
I want to have a bit more control.
Makes sense.
Oh, sorry, I'll step out of your way. So any medium at all, just try practicing ripple shapes with your medium of choice. Ballpoint pen if necessary. And if you need something, I've got pencils and paper up here. By the way, this is the Golden Gate Bridge reflection. I zoomed in my camera as close as it would go. And, so those are little bits of the vertical tower. Not to do a finished painting. This is just to try and make marks that look like ripples. Okay, 1 more minute. Okay. So I'm going to do a quick review of other people's paintings. And we're just going to try and think about all the things that we've talked about today. And what are the cues that each artist has used to indicate that this is water? So here's some more Bill Cones. what do you see here? How do you know that this is water down here and this is dry land up there?
Model muted, mixed
Very
colors,
distinct.
soft edges.
Dark line.
Just mutter to yourself, saying it all
Light
aloud.
reflecting off the water.
The rock in the foreground there to see where it's bottom of the line.
Okay. How about this one? How do you know that that's water?
There's a beach and there's land. Looks like foam and water, like waves going off.
You know what I think is happening here is it's like those low light photos we showed earlier of the sunset over the lagoon out there.
It reminds me of historical photos from history.
Uh-huh.
I was going to say from Presidio, but essentially like these really kind of two-tone, poor film cameras that they just had to kind of like capture what they could with the light that they could. And sometimes situations like that bring out those darks.
So sometimes water will just go pure white, especially when everything around it is really dark. Here's another Andrew Wyeth. So how do you know that this is water and that's dry?
Fading out. Brighter reflection.
Sort of getting a
Tom
mirror
Hoffman.
effect here.
You'll be teaching a class up at the Sierra Nevada Field Campus this summer. Also in San Francisco, but it's already sold out. But how do you know this is water? This is water here. Look at this white streak. And look at the dry brush there is making a little sparkle.
It reminds me of that wind phenomena that we were talking about that kept changing for you, like, oh, I'm going to draw that now, and then all of a sudden it was totally different. It looks like wind is just hit the surface of the water really hard right there.
And see how this is coalesced into a solid shape, whereas there's more detail there. Soft edges, hard edges. Here's some more Tom Hoffman's. He's getting a bit more abstract here. Now, these look like ripple marks, but look at this. These don't even look like those ripple marks, but somehow they read as ripples. I don't know how he does it, but you totally know that this is water. See, there's one of those white streaks again. There's some more white streaks. Vertical columns of reflections. Vertical tree. And this one, where he's almost totally abstract. How do you know that's water there? What has he done to cue you in that that's water?
There's like water, and there's like darkness, light.
And he's really messing with the rules we've already learned. So here's a soft edge on the dry land and a hard edge in the water. How does he get away with that? Something in there. I think our brains are always searching for cues to make sense of the world. So even in the most abstract painting, if there's a horizon and there's some blue up there, we'll think that that's sky. That our brains will seize on any pattern that we know to make sense of, and will construct a landscape out of that. If you turn that up on its side, it would just look totally abstract. It wouldn't look like a landscape at all.
But your reflection starts here.
Yeah.
The grid that you drew is really.
Anyway, okay, so resources to follow up and find out more about this. Bill Cohn has a blog. Shari Blaukopf has a blog. Look at the reflections in that. Wow. Tom Hoffman has a blog in which he gives the homework assignments for his advanced watercolor class, so you can follow along with his class if you want. This Electric Light Company website had a bunch of articles about reflections, which I used for the research in this. And I put up several galleries on Flickr of examples of reflections and water art. So a lot of the images in this slideshow, if you like what the artist did, look in the gallery, find the artist, and then look up more of their work. So there's two galleries. One is called Reflections and Other Tricky Things About Water. The other is more Reflections of Water. I filled up this one and had to start a new one. Going out sketching is always more fun with other people. You may think you're a loner, but actually it is more fun with other people. So places to find other people are the Nature Journal Club, this group. I run a meetup group that goes out sketching in the city every weekend. I recognize a lot of you from there. You can get on the mailing list for other classes that I teach here, or you can sign up here if you want to be on my mailing list. Once in a blue moon, I send out a MailChimp thing with upcoming classes and shows. Oh, by the way, this image for the class was done as part of the research I was doing for this class. That was one of my days of just trying out all different ways of doing reflections. So the Worldwide Sketch Crawl goes out once every 3 weeks and sketches all day. The International Urban Sketchers has classes and symposiums. It's going to be a series of 10 classes coming up in the Bay Area soon with some really terrific teachers, some of whom you saw their artwork today. And that's it.